Hi, Roger Linn here, and this is the Getting Started video. So I'm going to give you a quick guide to getting sounds out of your instrument very quickly and tell you about some of the panel controls, things like that. So first thing you do is connect the instrument up via a USB cable to your computer, and then you can just play sounds in your DAW and set them up and it'll be fine. Hold on, I'm going to do a quick reset here. If you don't want to use USB and instead you'd like to use the MIDI jacks, you can do that. But what you'll have to do is go into the global settings controls, and then global settings. In global settings, the lower four rows indicate the status of these settings printed on the bottom. You go into the column of the second from the right, and that is Power MIDI, and you want to select the second button from the bottom, which is MIDI jacks, instead of the bottom one, which is USB. Also, if you plan to use an iPad or iPhone, that's fine, in which you connect through Apple's camera connection kit, Lightning to USB camera connection kit. And for that, you need to plug into the USB from the adapter, but you need to set an instrument into low power mode. In that same column, press the fourth from the bottom, and that's the low power button. And that will reduce power, dim the lights a little bit, and that means you'll be able to use power your instrument entirely from your iPhone or iPad, which is very convenient. That way you don't have to have any sort of separate power. So I'll take both those off right now and then go into the basic operation. So it's connected to the computer, and right now it basically is just putting out MIDI, which you can use to play any MIDI synthesizer in the world. Now what I have here is in Logic. I have it loaded on a Mac, and it's playing an electric piano sound, but it could be anything, including the Bitwig software that we give away a free license for with each purchase of an instrument, Bitwig 8-track. So I've selected this electric piano sound, and I'll play it. That's it. So one thing you'll notice almost immediately is that the sounds in synthesizers are optimized for MIDI keyboards, which are basically very nice on-off switches. And so they don't do things like pressure sensing the sounds, or Y-axis control, or polyphonic pitch bends. Now, some synthesizers are starting to have some of these expressive sounds, but you can also program your own in. And on the LinnStrument support page, there's a button called Creating Sounds, and it tells you how to create sounds using the signals that LinnStrument puts out. So that's one way to do it. But in the ideal case, you want to use some of these new MPE compatible synthesizers. And there are about 50 of them listed on my site under on the page Recommended Sounds, which is accessed once again from the LinnStrument support page. By the way, the support page is the great place, the best go-to place to start if you have any questions or need more information, containing videos, the Getting Started page, FAQs, the forum, all kinds of great information. In the ideal case, you want to be able to have one of these MPE sound generators, and as I say, there's about 50 of them on the Recommended Sounds page on my site. And what this allows you to do is to have fully polyphonic three-dimensional continuous control. So in Logic, I happen to have loaded, Logic is fully MPE compatible, and I have a free downloadable file for Logic that you can download from the Getting Started page on my site, and it contains, it's actually either for Logic, or you can use the same sounds in Apple's $30 main stage, which is the live performance subset of Logic's features. And that's just wonderful. For $30, it's amazing. So here is one of the sounds. It's I call it analog pulse wave, and I'll show you that because it's an MPE sound. And to do that, I have to put LinnStrument into MPE mode. So I'm going to press per split settings, and I'll talk about these settings later on. I'll press per split settings, and then I'll hold the second button from the top in the leftmost column. And that puts LinnStrument into MPE mode. So now I've got independent pressure control, independent pitch control, and independent Y-axis control. So that's that. Next question is, where are the notes? If you might not know this, if you haven't seen the videos yet, the notes on LinnStrument are arranged like a stringed instrument. So you have each row consisting of consecutive semitones. And the lights tell you where the naturals are. The main lights are in green, and then you have what's called accent lights to tell you where the C within each octave is. And you can change those lights to any scale you want and the different colors, and I'll explain that later. So now I'd like to go into some of the settings. The preset, if you want to change the program change, the preset, the patch in your external synthesizer, press preset and slide your finger left and right, or increment it or decrement it. These settings over here are called all settings presets, and they save the entire state of the LinnStrument. So you can recall a bunch of settings at once and save whatever settings you want that way too. The volume button, just use this to turn the volume up or down for your preset, for your sound you're playing. And this changes the volume of the external synthesizer. All it does is send control chain 7 messages. And by the way, both preset volume and the octave transpose have settings for the left split and for the right split. And I'll talk about the splits in a moment. The next one is octave transpose. And that button points through little lines to octave, transpose pitch, and transpose lights. And so I can change the octave, I can change the transposition amount, I can change the position of the note lights left or right. If I want to have, for example, change it so that, for example, the C is in the lower left corner. So that's octave transpose. There are these two assignable switches, and those ones you can assign in the global setting that I'll talk about a little bit later. And those ones are by default set to sustain and arpeggiation. So if I turn that on, for example, then the split button changes LinnStrument into a split keyboard where you can have different MIDI settings and different sounds on the two splits. And to change the split point, you just hold this down and slide your finger. So next are these two different buttons, per split settings and global settings. Per split settings are settings that are unique for each of the two keyboard splits, left and right. And you can select which one you're viewing over here. Global settings, by comparison, are settings that are common to both splits and to the entire machine. So in per split settings, I'll go through these settings briefly. But to dig in deeper, you should go into the panel settings page, which is accessed once again from the LinnStrument support page. So the first column is MIDI mode, and you can send, oh, by the way, the upper 4 rows of lights in this case are being used as status indicators for the 4 printed parameters at the top of each column. So for example, in the MIDI mode column, I can select one channel, channel per note, or channel per row. One channel just sends everything through a single MIDI channel, just like any MIDI keyboard. Channel per note is also considered MPE mode, multidimensional polyphonic expression, a new standard created by us and Roley and Moog and Apple and a few others for communication between MPE keyboards like LinnStrument or Roley Seaboard or Continuum and MPE sound generators. As I mentioned earlier, for example, Logic and Mainstage are both MPE compatible, and there's about 50 others, and they're listed on my site under the recommended sounds page, which is accessed once again from the LinnStrument support page. So you can select one channel, channel per note, and if you hold that down, it sets all the other settings to be fully MPE compatible. The third one is channel per row, where the notes on each row are set over a single, over a separate MIDI channel. So the next 5 rows are MIDI channels, and you have 3 different things you can view. You can view the main channel, you can view the per note channels, or you can view the per row channels, and then the channels are indicated in these columns 3 through 6. So for example, if I'm using MPE mode, then I have my main channel and I have my per note channels. The main channel, which is assigned by default to channel 1, is the channel over which messages which are common to all voices are sent, like sustain pedal, program change, volume, CC7, things like that. And if I want to change that, I select main channel, and then I just select my main channel, whatever it is. And what I'm going to do now is look at the per note channels, and by default that's 1. The per note channels are the channels over which the individual notes are sent. So in MPE mode, or channel per note, I would play one note, that'll go over, say, channel 2, the next note will go over channel 3, the next one over channel 4, and that gives them the independent 3 dimensions, which are not possible over a single MIDI channel. And so this is telling me now that my per note channels are 2 through 8, and my main channel is channel 1. Now the next column is bend range. Unlike a MIDI keyboard, in LinnStrument you have the ability to set your bend range, and this is basically telling LinnStrument how many notes you want to slide across in order to be able to send the highest pitch bend message value. And all you have to do with this is make sure you set it to the same setting as in your synthesizer. So if your synthesizer has a sound that is a single channel sound intended for MIDI keyboards, for example, it's usually set to plus or minus 2. But for MPE use, you can set it to plus or minus 24 or even higher than that. In fact, if you hold down the plus or minus 24 button, the 4 buttons, by the way, are plus or minus 2, 3, 12, and 24. If you hold it down, you'll see a big number, and you can slide it anywhere from 1 to 96. So I'll set it back to 24 and then move on to the next column. The next 3 columns are pitch/X, timbre/Y, and loudness/Z, and they allow you to turn on and off the sending of these 3 continuous messages: pitch, Y-axis, or pressure, Z-axis. X is left, right, Y is forward, backward, and Z is up, down, or pressure. So you can turn those off if you want to thin out some of the MIDI data. For example, if you're not using pressure on a pluck string sound, you might want to just turn that off. And it also allows you to do some other things. In the pitch column, I can select quantize and quantize hold. Quantize is my initial touch, and quantize hold slides me back on the pitch at the end of a vibrato or a pitch slide, which is handy, and you have 3 speeds to do that. In the timbre Y column, you can select whether it's sent over CC1 or CC74, which is the standard MPE message for timbre/Y. And if you want a different CC, just hold down CC74 and you can select it, any CC you want. And the last one is relative mode, and you can take a look at the panel settings page to learn about that. Then comes loudness Z in the next column. You can turn it on and off, and you can select whether it's sent using MIDI polyphonic pressure messages, MIDI channel pressure messages, or MIDI control change 11 messages. And if you hold that down, you can select any CC number. Channel pressure is the one that's used in MPE because you get polyphonic pressure by virtue of the fact that each note is sent on its own MIDI channel. Next is the color column, and for this you get to select the colors of the main in green here, or accent colors in light blue here. So you just touch the pad to select from a palette of 10 different colors, and I'll set it back to green and blue. I like green and blue. Deep greens and blues are the colors I choose. So in the third one from the top is played, and this is the light of the changing color when you press on a note. It turns red. So you can change that color or turn that off entirely by cycling over to where it's off. And then the last one is low row, and this has to do with the next 2 columns I'll describe, which are the low row feature. And in this case, let me select a different sound. I can set the lowest row to, instead of being one of the playable rows, to be a control surface for playing, usually with your thumb. So if I set it to, for example, sustain, I can play a chord, and it will sustain the chord. If I set it to bend, then it'll be a big pitch bender. If I set it to CC1, it'll be a mod wheel. If I hold the CC1 down, I can select any CC number to send. Or there's XYZ, and this turns the lowest row into a 3-dimensional control strip, where X is set on one CC, Y is set on a different CC, and pressure is set on a different one. And those are all changeable to any CC, which you can find out how to do in the panel settings page. And then you can have it set to arpeggiator, where the arpeggiator will play only when you hold this down with your thumb. Then if you move your thumb, it changes it between the arpeggiator speeds. And you can learn about that once again in the panel settings page. And there's also restrike, there's strum, and you can learn about those in that page. And then I'll set that back to normal. You have the special column, and you have four options here: arpeggiator, CC fader, strum, and sequencer. Arpeggiator just turns the arpeggiator on at all times for that particular split. And if I didn't mention before, I think I did, you have your select split buttons up here. In this case, I'm editing and viewing the left splits selections. In this case, I'm editing and viewing the right splits selections. So the next one is CC faders in the special column. Now if I select in the right split CC faders, and then I go back to performance mode and turn the split on, then the right side will be 8 control change faders, by default set to CC 1 through 8. For example, if CC 7 is volume. And you can set, by holding down the CC faders button, you can change each one of those faders to be controlling any control change number you want. Now the next one is strum, and this is used for strumming mode. In this case, it's kind of like guitar. I can finger the notes here and play them over here. And the last one is sequencer, and this allows you to use LinnStrument's step sequencer. In this case, I have a data area over here and a bunch of different buttons that are labeled on the side, or if you have a large LinnStrument, they're labeled above on the right side because there's more space for parameters on the LinnStrument large model. And basically, you have here the play button. And there are many different things you can do, but I won't talk about those here because there's another video explaining how the sequencer works, and that would be found in the panel settings page in the rightmost tab called sequencer. There's a video right at the top, an explanation of all those functions in the sequencer work. So I'm going to turn the sequencer off, and now I'm going to talk about the global settings functions, which are located in the printed settings here at the bottom of the panel. If I turn on global settings, these 4 lower rows now indicate the status of each of the 4 printed settings at the bottom of the panel. So I'll go through these one by one. The first 4 rows are note lights on and off. And what these do, they allow you to control in the main performance mode which of the notes are lit. Now by default, the major scale is lit like the white keys of a piano, but you could change it to lighting any scale you want just by turning on and off the various 12 notes of the chromatic scale. To turn on or off the main lights, you select main. To turn on or off the accent lights, you select accent over here in the view column. And there are a couple other things here. The third one is not printed on there as labeled, but it is the ability to store 12 different memories of different scales. And then the fourth one is nice. That allows you to select left-handed mode, so the pitch direction is reversed. And you can find out about each of these things in the panel settings document. So the next one, row offset, basically allows you to tune the rows like tuning the strings. In this case, you can set it to preset values of 3 semitones interval between rows, 4, 5, 6, 7, or octave, or guitar tuning, wherein the upper 6 rows are tuned like guitar with the 2 additional fourths at the bottom. Or no overlap, where the start of each row is 1 note number higher than the end of the last row. So it doesn't overlap at all, whereas normal guitar string tuning or any stringed instrument tuning has overlapping pitches. So that is the row offset, and if you want to select any row offset other than just the ones that are given you, you press octave and then hold it down, and you can slide, and you can get anywhere from minus 16 semitones interval to plus 16 semitones interval, or minus guitar, which is guitar tuning backwards. You can play Jimi Hendrix style. Now, let's see, I have to set it back to that. Okay. Next are the foot and panel switch assignments, and these allow you to assign the function of the two panel switches, switch 1 and switch 2, and the two foot switches, which are connected to the foot switch input jack. And the options are octave up, octave down, sustain pedal, CC65, control range 65, arpeggiator, or alternate split, or a tap tempo. But there are a few others in there too. For example, if you hold down sustain, and as you probably know, sustain is merely control chain 64. So if you press that down, then you can see the control change number and adjust that by sliding your finger to anything else. Same thing for CC65. You hold that down and it says 65. And then the other thing is if you select and hold down tap tempo, there are a number of other options, either tap tempo, which is what's printed there, or if you slide it, you can go into legato mode, in which case every note you hit is sustained until you hit the next note, both for notes or for chords. Latch, which is an arpeggiator latch, and that means that if you're using the arpeggiator, you can touch and release different notes, and they'll all be added to the arpeggiated chord. After that is preset plus, preset minus, pitch, and what this does is, for example, if you assign it to a foot pedal, you can temporarily turn off smooth pitch slides, alternating between smooth pitch slides and stepped pitch slides, as on a fretted guitar. And then for the sequencer, you can have the foot switch be used as starting and stopping the sequencer, or to increment or decrement between the 4 sequences included in each of the 2 sequencers. So that is the foot switches. Next is velocity and pressure sensitivity, which you can set to high, medium, low independently. And in the velocity sensitivity, you can also select fixed, so it's a fixed velocity, and normally it's set at 96, but if you hold that down, you can adjust what that fixed velocity is. Next is in the pressure sensitivity column, the fourth from the bottom is aftertouch. And what this does is it allows you to turn on and off a simulation of the limited and fairly useless form of pressure sensing in a MIDI keyboard, where it only senses pressure once you've pressed the key about 95% of its travel. So it does the same thing here. Let's say, for example, you've got a preset in your synthesizer that's optimized for a MIDI keyboard, and you play it, and it doesn't have a modulation, but if you press really hard, it adds a modulation or some sort of a change. Well, you can simulate that here by pressing aftertouch. Next, the 3 columns to the right of that are the arpeggiator settings. And so the first column allows you to select the arpeggiation direction, either up, down, or if you press them together, up and down, you get up and down, or random, or replay all, which is what you've heard, where the entire chord is just repeated at the instantaneous pressure that you're holding it, kind of like a roll button on steroids. Next is the arpeggiator speed. You can set it to 8th notes, 16th notes, or 16th notes, or 32nd notes rather. And then you have triplets above that, so that makes these 8th note triplets, 16th note triplets, or 32nd note triplets. And if you press 8th and 16th together, you get swing, which is actually halfway between real swing and straight time. It's a very loose human feel, and I think it always sounds good. The next column is octave. If you can add 1 or 2 octaves to your arpeggiation, and that allows you to, for example, if you're holding a 3-note chord, it will then arpeggiate through those 3 notes, the 3 notes above that, or if you have it set to 2 octaves, then it adds 6 notes for the 2 octaves above that. And then finally is tap tempo, and if you do this, it's not working right now because I have sync coming from the LinnStrument, but normally if you press this, it's blinking the time of quarter notes at the current tempo. And if you touch it, if you tap it, you can tap in a quarter note and set the tempo, and the tempo will display it up here, and you can then slide your finger left to right to manually adjust it. Right now, it's receiving sync, so it overrides the internal tempo with the tempo that's being received here, in this case from Logic. And the tempo is used not only for the arpeggiator, but also for the built-in step sequencer. The next column is power/MIDI, and the bottom two cells allow you to select either USB or MIDI jack output. As we used, as I discussed when I was talking about how to hook it up to MIDI. The next one is sleep, and if you press this, it immediately just puts the instrument into sleep mode. But if you hold it, there are a few different cool options. You can adjust the time before it automatically goes into sleep if you want that. You can even show certain animations, like there's a Christmas animation with snow falling on green Christmas trees that we put in, and in-store animation that runs through a bunch of its features and things like that. And that's all explained once again in the panel settings pages. The last one is low power in this column, and that is putting the instrument into its low power mode so that it can be powered by an iPhone or iPad. And it also, if you like the lights to be a little bit dimmer, it dims the lights too. The last column is actions, and the 4 buttons there are number 1, notes off. That's just your panic button. If you have stuck notes in your external synthesizer, this will stop them. The next one is OS version. It's telling me that my OS version is 2.1.0. The next one is Update OS. If I turn that on, it puts LinnStrument in a mode where it doesn't play any MIDI data, but it sets it ready to receive an OS update from our Updater app. Now, if you ever find that your LinnStrument is not putting out MIDI, that's a good one to check. If you happen to have that accidentally turned on, LinnStrument won't set any MIDI data. The upper one here is calibrate, and you really need to never use that. If it's green, it means your unit's calibrated. If it's red, it means your unit's not calibrated. Perhaps for some reason something happened and it wasn't calibrated. If that's the case, just look in the paddle settings page, and there's an explanation there and a link to a video telling you how to calibrate it. But generally you don't want to do that because we calibrate it much better at the factory, and you should never need to change that. So I do not recommend changing that. Very important thing is if you ever find yourself confused, especially when you are new to LinnStrument, and you think you may have set a setting wrongly and it isn't performing the way you want it to do, you can instantly reset it back to the factory settings. To do that, and it's written here in the word reset, linking the lowest and third from lowest buttons. You press the lowest button and the third from lowest at the same time. It says reset, and it resets everything back to normal status. So that's pretty much it. Once again, go to the LinnStrument support page, and you're going to find lots and lots of information that's helpful in a variety of ways. And if you can't get your questions answered there, you're welcome to call me, and I print the email address and phone number, which gets to me directly on that page, as well as in the letter you receive when you bought your new LinnStrument. So thank you very much for buying a LinnStrument and for watching this video.